No sooner did we have the Shiloh Hendrix meltdown than everyone became an art critic in MAGA land. This giant bronze statue of a woman was just installed in the middle of Times Square. So this is the statue. I gotta say, as somebody who really does not like modern art public sculptures, it's refreshingly naturalistic. So here's it's human. It's a human. It's not a cube. We'll get into that. Is a massive 12-foot tall bronze sculpture of a young woman by figurative artist Thomas J. Price. It's on the north side of Duffy Square on Broadway and 46th Street, facing 47th. That's where the TKTS booth is, by the way, where you get your discount Broadway tickets. It will be on display through June 17th. The public art piece is part of a series called Grounded in the Stars, which, quote, confronts preconceived notions of identity and representation. As you know, I'm not crazy about that kind of thing either, but we will get into that as well.
And communicate those inner worlds that we have, and sometimes we misinterpret with one another, to try and create an understanding and basically encourage empathy.
I have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lead.
So a lot of people have a real problem with this statue. A new statue in Times Square. Yes, it's real. Public art and architecture matter. They represent and communicate a society's ideology and values. Their effects on the population are real. This represents a very sick society. Wow. Okay. All right. So the artist himself said that the pose was somewhat inspired by Michelangelo's David. You can see it's not an exact duplication of that pose. Michelangelo, strangely, was trending this week because it was his 550th birthday yesterday.
I forgot.
Yeah, you didn't get him. You didn't get him anything, and because the conclave meets in the Sistine Chapel. So the views that are being expressed about this, and this is often the case with these kinds of cultural outrages, it's very similar to Daryl Cooper. You could only assert these things to people who are completely ignorant of the entire subject. And, that's most people. So it's a very lucrative space to get into, the completely misrepresenting everything. So let's go through this a little bit. So nobody has a problem with this, right? I mean, that's a classical statue, right? That's a classical statue by most people's standards. That's fine, right? That's fine. This is wrong. That's fine. Okay, so at the time that this was unveiled, the critics hated this statue. This is the Angel of the Waters that caps the Bethesda Fountain at Central Park. You've probably seen this in countless films and TV shows. That's it from a distance. Here's a little bit about it. The New York Times critic panned the statue for being too masculine. The head is distinctly a male man. The breasts are feminine. The rest of the body is in part male and in part female. The angel is an absurd mosaic of the two sexes, the critic concluded, scandalized. Now, you probably didn't think any of that when you looked at it. Now, you know why he might have thought that? Because the artist, Emma Stebbins, was a pretty out-of-the-closet lesbian woman in a relationship with a pretty famous actress, Charlotte Cushman. This is the first statue in New York City that a woman got commissioned to do, and it was the only statue that was commissioned to be part of the original Central Park design. The other statues came later. Also, this is very interesting because part of the exception to having this woman other than her race is the way that she's dressed as kind of like an average person, right? That was part of the critics' issue with this representation of an angel. A lot of people felt that she looked like a milkmaid, because today we wouldn't recognize it that way. But back then, the way that she's dressed, that's kind of like a farm girl kind of an outfit. And the way you were supposed to portray angels was as nobility. They were supposed to wear Greek or Roman robes. So that was part of the issue. So they had the issue with the physical appearance, probably informed by knowing that Stebbins was a lesbian and just assuming that she was masculine a lot. Masculine, you say it, Keaton.
Masculine?
Masculinizing the angel. There you go. So now Michelangelo, who everybody loves, right? He was also gay, although very guilty about it in that era of Christianity being much more prevalent, prominent than it is now. But he was gay, and a lot of people say that's why the women on the Sistine Chapel look like men. That's Michelangelo. That's the Michelangelo that we love so much. Good, clean art. But he made his women very distinctly look like men. Probably because
swimmers.
The first place swimmers. These are all Leah Thomas lookalikes. These paintings, right? So hey, he, just like Stebbins, seems to have projected his homosexuality into the Sistine Chapel, the holiest of holy places. So do you still like Michelangelo? Is David still all right? Have you all seen the new statue in Times Square? Are we celebrating obesity now? That's so maha, ha ha ha. Western civilization then and now. So showing like a skinny bitch there. Okay, man. I mean, if you know the first thing about the history of art, you know that female bodies have very often been represented much more like the statue on the right than the one on the left, and not by obscure artists, not an experimental art. This is Titian, about 1515 rather. This is my own photo from the Capitoline Museum in Rome. Kind of a not well-known artist, D. Simonetta, right around the same time, 1521. About the same size as the woman in that statue. Peter Paul Rubens, of course, gave us the term Rubenesque because he usually painted his women that way. So the idea that Western art has exclusively portrayed what we today think of as the ideal form, that's absolutely ignorant. And if you want to go all the way back, some of the earliest sculptures we have from Neolithic archaeological sites very often portrayed women as full-bodied earth mothers, symbols of fertility, which this is much more in keeping with. Now, a big part of why these body images evolve, these ideal body types evolve, is because of what rich people look like in any given period. The reason that in the Renaissance, in the Middle Ages, a bigger, and a man too. I mean, you look at the Henry VIII portraits, he's big and portly, because that meant you had enough food to be fat, right? Most people didn't have enough food. If you were muscular, you were probably working in the fields. So being kind of doughy and fat in that period became the ideal. Today, we've kind of gone back because it shows you can eat good food and go to the gym. You have the leisure time and you have the money not to be eating shit. So now we've gone back to this ideal of being pumped, but you know that's all dependent on what rich people look like in any given era. So now I saw David and I was unimpressed, as you could see. This is me in Florence commenting on David's anatomy. So I feel, look, this is what I'm going to say. For all the small dicked racists out there, black women deserve representation too. Like, you've had this representation for 500 years. The small dick community is very well represented. I think it's about time that we have other kinds of representation. You guys have had your day. The small dicked white people who are apoplectic about seeing a black woman in Times Square, Well, you know, you have to make a little room for other people now. So this person, Jay Garcia, points this out appropriately. What statue of an American hero was torn down in Times Square? Just turn around. You will find the World War II Chaplain statue or another white entertainer composer. This is a temporary installation. Calm the fuck down. Exactly. You got George M. Cohan and Father Francis Patrick Duffy, for whom that square is named. It's Father Francis Patrick Duffy Square. They're staying. She's going on June 17th. On June 17th. So, is there a legitimate issue to be had with this statue and its intentions? There is. There is. So, this is what the artist, in my opinion, this is what the artist says about it. Times Square stands as an iconic symbol and site of convergence, uniting people from all walks of life, individual stories and experiences intersecting on a global platform, said Price in an official statement. The intention of my public works is to become part of the place they inhabit and its physical material history, as well as the visitors that pass through and around the location, no matter how fleeting. I hope Grounded in the Stars and Man series will instigate meaningful connections and bind intimate emotional states that allow for deeper reflection around the human condition and greater cultural diversity. Okay, so now that is the problem for me. We've said this before. I believe that the so-called left, it's not a real left, the so-called arts community, I wouldn't even consider most of it a real arts community. I feel that they have been psyoped into limiting their imaginations to questions of identity and culture to the exclusion of all other things. I think it would not even occur to most of the artists, certainly the artists who would get the kind of commission. God knows what he got paid for this commission. The horizon of their vision ends at identity, and they all sound exactly the same. The liner notes for these galleries all sound like that. They all sound like they just walked out of a course centered on anti-racism, and there's nothing else to think about. They don't talk about economics. They don't talk about class. That's it. That's their idea of moving society forward. And I think that's quite intentional. Now, it was not always like this. It's interesting that this statue stands a few blocks from Rockefeller Center, where one of the most famous acts of artistic vandalism took place in 1932. So Diego Rivera was contracted to do the main painting in the lobby of the RCA building. He was friends with John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his wife, Abby Rockefeller, was a big collector of art, a big patron of Diego Rivera. He had actually been kicked out of the Communist Party for taking these kinds of commissions. So the left has been shooting itself in the dick for a very long time. But Diego Rivera got the commission, and he wanted the theme of the worker at the crossroads. So you have the worker in the middle, and you have socialism on one side, and you have capitalism on the other. So if you zoom in, if you look up here, this is on the capitalism side. He's got up there kind of sexually transmitted disease cells, like they're a pestilence, they're a disease on society, naturally being a communist. You see down here the decadent rich, the women smoking, playing cards while people are sent to war. And you see the police here breaking a strike. Then on the other side, it's not that Diego Rivera wasn't thinking about race. He very intentionally showed a multiracial working class, putting a black man very prominently next to Lenin there. You've got Trotsky, you've got Marx there on that side. Now, critics started to bring up how this was, a love letter to communism, which, to be fair, it was. So Rockefeller started asking him to change it, to at least balance it out. First, he wanted him to take out Lenin. He asked him to put in Lincoln. Rivera absolutely refused. So this entire painting was plastered over. This painting is from Rivera recreated it in Mexico. So if you go to Mexico, you can see his recreation of it. But the original painting is completely lost, and they replaced it with something that celebrates the triumph of America through the combination of brains and brawn, and you have Lincoln and you have Emerson in there, and nothing that will upset anybody. So at one time, you did have artists who would address questions of class and economics. In fact, that would have been the norm for most artists. How did we wind up in a place where none of the most prominent artists have anything to say about these kinds of issues? I believe that's an op. I believe that's by design. If I have an issue with that statue, and I don't artistically, like if you like classical art, isn't it more like this than it is like that, which stands outside of the Brown Brothers Harriman building downtown? I fucking hate that shit. You want to talk about the destruction of the classical tradition? This is not it. That is it. That is it. What is that? What does that mean? What is wrong with a kind of normal person being represented like that? I mean, I artistically I think it's pretty strong. My issue is that discussions of identity, statements of identity, which the artist himself says that's what it's intended to be, are to the exclusion of all other things. You would never see an artist get that commission today with the intention that Diego Rivera had with that mural. Never, never. You would never see something with those themes in Times Square. And indeed, in the end, you don't see it in Rockefeller Center.
Yeah, I like the sculpture.
I
I think
like
it's
it.
yeah, I like
I
it.
like it.
It's what I see when I see that it's a New Yorker. That's what I think it is. I mean, I think to
Right.
me it says New York to me.
Sure. And there's a place for that. Like, what's wrong with
Yeah,
that?
yeah. Is it like a weathered, world weary person who just goes up against it every day, the way you go up against it every day when you live in New
Sure.
York? When I visited Russ last year before the Jose fundraiser, we met at his apartment, and it's a fifth floor walk up, and I was like, yeah, this reminds me. Back when I lived in New York, just to go home, you have to climb, usually at least 2 or 3 flights of stairs, if not five. Like it's a town that beats you up, and that's what she looks like. She looks like someone who
Right.
lives a
Yeah.
life. She seems like a working class person. So I think it works to me. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I
No.
think it's actually pretty good.
No, my only issue is that, hey, I take the artist at his word. He wants it to be a statement of different identities being represented, and I don't even say there's no place for that. I mean, yes, this sets between two permanent statues of white people who I think deserve to be there. George M. Cohan wrote some of the most iconic musical numbers for Broadway. He's on Broadway. Father Francis Patrick Duffy used his position in a church off Times Square to get the Broadway stars to come to Hell's Kitchen to expose the poverty there. I'm not saying they don't deserve it, but yeah, man. I mean, what's wrong with making the statement that, hey, man, maybe some other people from other groups should be represented? I don't have a problem with that. My problem is that all of this is intended to funnel, in my opinion, the conversation only towards questions of identity and culture to the exclusion of all other conversations. And that's, man, when you see these people going berserk about this, I think some of them are real. I think some of them are ops intended to stimulate the ones who are real to jump up and down about this. They want us talking about everything except for the actual cause of our problems in this country. It's what you see in the Shiloh Hendricks case. They want everyone to blame another person who has no money and power in order to distract them from the people who do.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange that the artist would say that this is a comment on identity and representation, because this is pretty clearly, if you were to look at this, you would say this is a working class person like that. And that's why I say it says New York to me, because, and especially where it is, it's in Times Square. People have all around the world, because New York is really the capital of the world in so many ways. They have an image of their mind of what a New Yorker is. Some people think Wall Street, some people think the cops, some people think, the pizza guy or whatever. But this is the kind of person I think of when I think of New York. Like, these are the New Yorkers.
You're right.
Like these are the average people who actually make the city run. And I think if you live there, even for a short period of time, you'll get the same sense. So yeah, no, I do think it is well done. Now I just have to say, my friend, this is a brontosaurus, and a pretty cool one at that. It's a dinosaur.
Shut the fuck.
It's a dinosaur. Well, you don't like dinosaurs? He hates dinosaurs.
I don't hate dinosaurs. I hate bad art.
Please clap.